Catherine Williams sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blank piece of paper before her. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows of her small apartment, casting delicate patterns across the wooden surface. Christmas was only 3 days away, and she had promised herself she would write the letter today. But where could she even begin? At 28 years old, Catherine had already experienced more heartbreak than most people face in a lifetime. 6 months ago, she had lost her younger brother Michael in a car accident. The pain still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. Michael had been her closest friend, her confidant, and the one person who truly understood her dreams of becoming a writer. She picked up her pen and wrote "Dear Michael" at the top of the page, then stopped. The words seemed inadequate somehow. How do you write to someone who can no longer read your letters? How do you express love to someone who exists now only in memories and photographs? Catherine's phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her concentration. It was a text from her mother. "Don't forget about Christmas dinner tomorrow. The whole family will be there. Love you, sweetheart." The thought of facing her extended family filled Catherine with dread. She knew they meant well, but their well-meaning questions and careful avoidance of mentioning Michael would be almost unbearable. Last Christmas, Michael had been the life of the party, telling jokes and making everyone laugh with his impressions of their various relatives. This year, his absence would hang over the gathering like a dark cloud. She set her phone aside and tried to focus on the letter again. Michael had always encouraged her writing, even when she doubted herself. He used to say that her words had the power to touch people's hearts in ways she couldn't imagine. If only he were here now to help her find those words. Catherine worked at a small non-profit organization that helped families in need during the holidays. It was meaningful work, but it didn't pay much, and she often struggled to make ends meet. This Christmas, she had volunteered to work extra hours to help distribute food and gifts to local families, partly because she needed the money but mostly because she couldn't bear the thought of sitting alone in her apartment with her grief. Yesterday, she had met a family that reminded her so much of her own childhood. The Johnsons were struggling financially after the father lost his job, but they were determined to make Christmas special for their 3 young children. Mrs. Johnson had tears in her eyes as she thanked Catherine for the food basket and small gifts they had received. "You don't understand what this means to us," Mrs. Johnson had said, clutching Catherine's hand. "My kids were starting to think Santa had forgotten about them." That moment had inspired Catherine to start writing again. She realized that Michael's death, while devastating, had also taught her something important about the fragility and preciousness of life. She wanted to capture that feeling, to somehow transform her grief into something that might help others. She began to write, "Michael, I know you can't read this letter, but I need to write it anyway. I need to tell you about the things I've learned since you've been gone, about the way losing you has changed how I see the world." The words began to flow more easily now. She wrote about the morning she got the phone call about the accident, how time seemed to stop and the world became suddenly silent. She wrote about the funeral, where hundreds of people came to pay their respects to her brother, each one sharing a story about how he had touched their lives. "I never knew," she continued, "how many people you had helped, how many lives you had made better just by being yourself. Mrs. Patterson from down the street told me how you used to shovel her driveway every winter without her asking. Your friend Jake said you once gave him your lunch money for a week when his family was going through a rough patch." Catherine paused, remembering her brother's generous spirit. Michael had worked as a social worker, helping children in the foster care system. He never made much money, but he gave everything he had to help others. She had always admired that about him, even when she worried that he was too giving for his own good. The letter grew longer as Catherine poured her heart onto the page. She wrote about her guilt over the last conversation they had shared. It had been a silly argument about something she couldn't even remember now, and she had hung up on him in frustration. That was 3 days before the accident, and she never got the chance to apologize. "I keep thinking about all the things I never said to you," she wrote. "How proud I was of the work you did, how grateful I was to have you as my brother, how much I loved your terrible jokes and your habit of calling me at random times just to check in." As she wrote, Catherine found herself remembering not just the pain of losing Michael, but also the joy of having known him. She thought about their childhood adventures, building forts in the backyard and staying up late telling ghost stories. She remembered how he had defended her from bullies at school and how he had been the first person to read every story she had ever written. The apartment grew darker as the afternoon wore on, but Catherine continued writing by lamplight. She wrote about the way grief had changed her, how it had made her more aware of the precious nature of every moment. She wrote about the family she had met through her work, and how their resilience in the face of hardship had inspired her. "I see you everywhere now," she wrote. "In the smile of a child receiving a Christmas gift, in the gratitude of a parent who can provide for their family, in the kindness of strangers who help each other through difficult times." Catherine realized that what had started as a personal letter to her deceased brother was becoming something more. It was becoming a reflection on loss, love, and the connections that bind us all together. She thought about Mrs. Johnson and her children, about her co-workers who had supported her through her grief, about the friends and family who had rallied around her in the months since Michael's death. The letter had grown to several pages by the time Catherine finally set down her pen. Her hand ached from writing, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She read through what she had written, surprised by the raw honesty of her words. On impulse, she picked up her phone and called her friend Sarah, who worked as an editor at the local newspaper. "Catherine, how are you holding up?" Sarah asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm doing better," Catherine replied. "Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. I've been writing again, and I wondered if you might take a look at something I wrote." "Of course," Sarah said immediately. "You know I'd do anything to help." Catherine hesitated for a moment, then continued. "It's a letter to Michael, but it's also about Christmas, about family, about the things that matter most. I don't know if it's any good, but something about it feels important." "Bring it by the office tomorrow," Sarah said. "I'd love to read it." After hanging up, Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. She wasn't sure what would come of it, but she knew that writing it had been exactly what she needed to do. For the first time since Michael's death, she felt like she was honoring his memory in a way that would have made him proud. Outside her window, snow had begun to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white. Christmas lights twinkled in the windows of neighboring apartments, and Catherine could hear the distant sound of carolers singing in the park nearby. The world was preparing for Christmas, and, for the first time in months, Catherine felt ready to be a part of it. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snow fall. Tomorrow she would face her family, and it would be difficult without Michael there. But tonight, she had found a way to feel close to him again through her words. The letter had become a bridge between her grief and her hope, between the past she had lost and the future she was still learning to imagine. As she prepared for bed, Catherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since the accident. Writing the letter had reminded her of something Michael used to tell her, that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. Perhaps her words could be a way of keeping that love alive, not just for herself but for others who were struggling with their own losses during what was supposed to be the most joyful time of the year. The letter sat on her kitchen table, waiting for tomorrow's visit to Sarah's office. Catherine didn't know it yet, but those pages contained words that would soon touch thousands of hearts and remind a nation of the true meaning of Christmas. Her brother's legacy of kindness was about to reach far beyond anything either of them could have imagined. The next morning, Catherine woke with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The letter sat exactly where she had left it on the kitchen table, the envelope crisp and white in the morning sunlight. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about sharing something so personal with Sarah, and potentially with a wider audience. After a quick breakfast, Catherine bundled herself in her winter coat and made the 20-minute walk to the newspaper office. The city was bustling with last-minute Christmas shoppers, their arms full of packages and their faces bright with holiday excitement. Street vendors sold hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts, and the air was filled with the sounds of Christmas carols and happy chatter. Despite the festive atmosphere around her, Catherine felt a familiar pang of sadness. This time last year, she and Michael had spent the day shopping together, laughing as they tried to find the perfect gifts for their parents. He had insisted on buying silly joke gifts alongside the serious ones, claiming that laughter was the best present anyone could receive. The newspaper office was a modest three-story building nestled between a coffee shop and a bookstore. Catherine had visited many times over the years, as Sarah had been trying to convince her to submit her writing for publication. Today felt different though. This wasn't fiction or a personal essay written for practice. This was her heart laid bare on paper. Sarah greeted her with a warm hug in the lobby. "I'm so glad you called yesterday," she said, studying Catherine's face with concern. "You look like you didn't sleep much." "I couldn't stop thinking about the letter," Catherine admitted. "Part of me wonders if I'm making a mistake by sharing something so personal." "Let me read it first," Sarah suggested gently. "Then, we can talk about what feels right to you." They settled into Sarah's small office, which was cluttered with newspapers, press releases, and coffee cups in various stages of emptiness. Family photos covered one wall, and a small Christmas tree sat on the windowsill, decorated with tiny ornaments that caught the light. Catherine handed over the envelope with trembling fingers. "I want you to know that whatever you think, I'm grateful that you're willing to read it." Sarah opened the letter carefully and began to read. Catherine watched her friend's expressions change as she worked through the pages: surprise, sadness, and something that looked like awe. When Sarah finally looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. "Catherine," she said softly, "this is extraordinary." "Really?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Really? You've captured something here that I think a lot of people are feeling, especially during the holidays. The way you write about grief, about love continuing beyond death, about finding meaning in loss, it's beautiful and honest and important." Sarah leaned back in her chair, still holding the letter. "I think this could really touch people. With your permission, I'd like to show it to my editor." Catherine felt her stomach flutter with anxiety. "What would that mean exactly?" "Well, we could publish it as a special Christmas piece. Maybe on Christmas Eve, when people are thinking about family and connection. But I want you to be sure about this, because once it's out there, you can't take it back." The thought of thousands of strangers reading her most private thoughts was terrifying, but Catherine also felt a stirring of excitement. If her words could help even one person who was struggling with loss during the holidays, wouldn't that honor Michael's memory in the best possible way? "Can I think about it?" Catherine asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." They spent the next hour talking about the letter, about grief, and about the power of sharing our stories with others. Sarah shared her own experience of losing her father the previous year, and how reading about other people's experiences with loss had helped her feel less alone. "You know," Sarah said as Catherine prepared to leave, "there's something special about this piece. It's not just about your brother, it's about all the people we've lost and all the love that remains. I think you've written something that could really matter." Catherine left the newspaper office with her mind spinning. She walked slowly through the city, noticing things she usually missed: an elderly man feeding pigeons in the park, a young mother pushing her baby in a stroller while singing softly, a group of teenagers building a snowman and laughing at their creation. Each scene reminded her of something from her letter, of the connections between people that make life meaningful. She thought about Michael and how he had always been able to see the beauty in ordinary moments. Maybe sharing her letter would be a way of passing on that gift to others. Her phone rang as she passed the coffee shop near her apartment. It was her mother. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to remind you that dinner is at 4 o'clock today. Are you feeling okay about coming?" Catherine had almost forgotten about the family Christmas gathering. The thought of facing everyone still made her anxious, but writing the letter had somehow made the prospect more bearable. "I'll be there, Mom," she said. "And I think I'm doing a little better today." "I'm so glad to hear that. We've all been worried about you." "I know. I love you too." After hanging up, Catherine realized she had made a decision. She called Sarah back. "I want to do it," she said when Sarah answered. "I want you to publish the letter." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "Yes. Michael always said that if you have something meaningful to share, you have a responsibility to share it. I think this letter might help other people who are grieving during the holidays. I'll talk to my editor this afternoon." If she agrees, we could run it on Christmas Eve. That evening, Catherine arrived at her parents' house with a nervous stomach but a lighter heart. The familiar smells of her mother's cooking filled the air, and Christmas music played softly in the background. Her aunts, uncles, and cousins were already gathered in the living room, their conversations creating a warm buzz of family connection. As expected, there were awkward moments. People didn't know quite what to say to her, and Michael's absence felt enormous. But Catherine found herself thinking about the letter, about the love that continues even after death, and somehow that made everything more bearable. During dinner, her cousin Jennifer mentioned that she had been struggling since her divorce earlier that year. "This is my first Christmas without Tom," she said quietly. "I know it's not the same as what you're going through, Catherine, but the holidays just feel so different when someone important isn't there anymore." Without thinking, Catherine found herself sharing some of what she had written in her letter, about how grief changes us but also teaches us to appreciate what we have, about how love takes new forms but never truly disappears. She spoke about the family she had met through her work and how their resilience had inspired her. The conversation around the dinner table grew deeper and more meaningful than it had been in years. Other family members began sharing their own experiences with loss and struggle, but also with gratitude and hope. Catherine's uncle talked about losing his job but finding a new career he loved. Her grandmother spoke about missing her late husband but finding joy in her grandchildren. "You know," her mother said later as they cleaned up the dishes, "something was different about tonight. You helped bring us together in a way we haven't been in a long time." "I think Michael would have liked that," Catherine replied. "I know he would have. He always said you had a gift for bringing out the best in people." The next day, Sarah called with good news. "My editor loves the letter. We're going to run it on the front page of the Christmas Eve edition, with a beautiful layout. Are you ready for this?" Catherine felt a moment of panic, followed by a surge of excitement. "I think so. When will people see it?" "The paper hits the stands Christmas Eve morning." "But, Catherine, there's something else. My editor thinks this could be picked up by other newspapers. Your letter might reach a lot more people than just our local readership." The possibility both thrilled and terrified Catherine. She had written the letter for Michael, and then decided to share it locally to help people in her own community. The thought that it might reach people across the country felt overwhelming. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Just be prepared. If this takes off the way I think it might, you could be hearing from a lot of people." "But, Catherine, I really believe this message is exactly what people need to hear right now." That evening, Catherine sat in her apartment and read through her letter one more time. In less than 2 days, thousands of people would read these words that had come from the deepest part of her grief and love. She felt scared and excited and hopeful all at once. She thought about Michael and how proud he would be of her for taking this leap. He had always believed that her writing could touch people's hearts, and now she was about to find out if he was right. Whatever happened next, she knew she had honored his memory by sharing the love and wisdom he had taught her. Outside her window, the city was preparing for Christmas. But, inside her apartment, Catherine was preparing for something even more significant, the moment when her personal letter to her brother would become a gift to anyone who needed to hear that love never truly dies. Christmas Eve morning arrived with a blanket of fresh snow and a crisp, clear sky. Catherine woke earlier than usual, her heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. Today was the day her letter would be published, and she had no idea what kind of response to expect. She walked to the corner newsstand where she had bought papers countless times before, but this morning felt completely different. The elderly man who ran the stand, Mr. Peterson, smiled at her as she approached. "Beautiful morning for Christmas Eve," he said cheerfully, then paused as he looked at her face. "You all right, dear? You look a bit pale." Catherine managed a nervous smile. "Just excited about Christmas," she said, though that wasn't exactly the truth. She bought a copy of the paper with trembling hands and found a nearby bench to sit on. There, on the front page, was her letter with the headline "A Sister's Christmas Letter, Finding Love After Loss." Below it was a smaller subtitle that read "Local woman's tribute to her deceased brother touches hearts and reminds us what Christmas is really about." Seeing her deeply personal words in print made her feel exposed and vulnerable, but also strangely proud. The newspaper had formatted the letter beautifully, with an elegant border and a small photo of Catherine that Sarah had taken the day before. As she read her own words in print, Catherine was struck by how different they looked in the newspaper format. Somehow, seeing them this way made her realize that they no longer belonged only to her and Michael. They had become something public, something shared. Her phone started ringing before she even finished reading. The first call was from her mother. "Sweetheart, I just saw the paper," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you had written something like this. It's beautiful." "I hope I did the right thing," Catherine said. "You absolutely did. Michael would be so proud of you." The calls didn't stop after that. Her aunt called to say the letter had made her cry in the best possible way. Her former college roommate, who lived across the country, somehow got hold of a copy and called to tell Catherine how moved she was. Even her high school English teacher reached out to praise her writing. But it was the call from a complete stranger that really made Catherine realize what was happening. "Is this Catherine Williams?" a woman's voice asked when she answered the phone. "Yes, this is Catherine. My name is Mary Rodriguez. I live in Chicago, but my sister here in your city called and read me your letter over the phone. I lost my husband 6 months ago, and I've been dreading Christmas. But your words, they helped me understand that loving someone doesn't end just because they're not physically here anymore." Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears. "I'm so glad it helped you. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I just wanted you to know that your brother's memory is already helping people he never even met. That's a beautiful thing." After hanging up, Catherine sat in stunned silence. She had hoped her letter might help a few people in her local community, but the idea that it was already reaching people in other cities was almost incomprehensible. Sarah called an hour later, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Catherine, you're not going to believe what's happening. 3 other newspapers have already called asking to reprint your letter. And someone from a radio station wants to interview you this afternoon." "This is all happening so fast," Catherine said, feeling overwhelmed. "I know it's a lot. But, Catherine, this is exactly the kind of story people need right now. Your letter is going viral in the best possible way." The radio interview that afternoon was both terrifying and cathartic. The host, a gentle woman named Linda, asked thoughtful questions about Catherine's relationship with Michael and what had inspired her to write the letter. "What do you hope people take away from your words?" Linda asked. "I hope they understand that grief doesn't mean love has ended," Catherine replied. "It means love is so strong that it continues even when the person we love can't be with us anymore. And I hope people realize that sharing our stories of loss and love can help us all feel less alone." The phones at the radio station lit up with callers sharing their own stories. A man called in to talk about losing his son in military service. A woman shared her experience of losing her mother to cancer. Each caller thanked Catherine for giving them words for feelings they couldn't express. After the interview, Catherine walked home through the snowy streets, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. The city looked magical in the Christmas Eve snow, with lights twinkling in every window and families hurrying to last-minute gatherings. She stopped by the nonprofit where she worked to check on the Christmas Eve food distribution. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, greeted her with a huge hug. "I heard you on the radio today," Mrs. Chen said. "Everyone here is so proud of you." "I never expected anything like this to happen," Catherine admitted. "Maybe that's why it's so powerful. You weren't trying to be famous or make a statement. You were just being honest about love and loss." Catherine spent a few hours helping distribute meals to families in need. Working with her hands and focusing on helping others felt grounding after the overwhelming morning. She met a young mother who was spending Christmas Eve in a shelter with her 2 small children. "Thank you for this," the woman said as Catherine handed her a bag of groceries. "My kids have been so worried that Santa wouldn't find us here." "Santa always finds children who need him," Catherine said gently, then added, "and sometimes Santa looks like ordinary people who care about each other." As evening approached, Catherine returned to her apartment to prepare for Christmas Eve dinner with her family. Her answering machine was full of messages from newspapers, radio stations, and television programs wanting to interview her. There were also dozens of calls from ordinary people sharing their own stories of loss and gratitude. One message particularly moved her. It was from an elderly man whose voice shook as he spoke. "Miss Williams, my wife died last spring, and I've been so angry about spending Christmas alone. But your letter helped me remember all the Christmases we had together, and I realized I'm not really alone because I carry her love with me everywhere. Thank you for helping an old fool remember what matters." Catherine saved that message, and several others like it. She was beginning to understand that her letter had somehow given people permission to grieve openly while also celebrating the love that remains. Her parents' house was warm and welcoming when she arrived for dinner. The family had seen the newspaper and heard the radio interview, and everyone was buzzing with pride and excitement about Catherine's sudden prominence. "I still can't believe my little sister is going to be on national television," her cousin Tom said as they gathered around the dinner table. "Wait, what?" Catherine asked, confused. "Oh, didn't Sarah tell you?" her mother said. "A producer from Good Morning America called the newspaper office this afternoon. They want to interview you tomorrow morning via satellite." Catherine felt dizzy. This is all happening too fast. Her father, who had been quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke up. "You know, Catherine, I think Michael always knew you had something important to say to the world. Maybe this is his way of making sure people listen." That night, Catherine could barely sleep. Her phone continued to ring with interview requests, and her email inbox was overflowing with messages from people who had heard about her letter and wanted to share their own experiences with loss. She read through dozens of emails from people across the country who had lost spouses, children, parents, siblings, and friends. Each message was a testament to the power of love to endure beyond death, and to the human need to connect with others who understand grief. One email came from a woman in Texas whose teenage son had died in a swimming accident. "Your letter helped me realize that I don't have to choose between grieving my son and celebrating Christmas with my surviving children. I can hold both sorrow and joy at the same time, and that's okay." Another came from a man in Seattle who had lost his best friend. "I've been carrying guilt about enjoying life when my friend can't. Your words about love changing form but never ending helped me understand that my friend would want me to find happiness." As Catherine read message after message, she began to realize that her letter had tapped into something much larger than her own personal grief. She had given voice to a universal human experience, the struggle to hold on to love in the face of loss, and the search for meaning in the midst of pain. Around midnight, she finally turned off her phone and computer. Tomorrow would bring more interviews and more attention, but tonight she wanted to sit quietly and think about Michael. She lit a candle and placed it in the window, a Christmas Eve tradition they had shared since childhood. "I hope you can see what's happening, Michael," she whispered to the flickering flame. "Your love is reaching so many people now." Outside, snow continued to fall on the sleeping city. Inside her apartment, Catherine felt the presence of her brother's love surrounding her like a warm embrace. Her letter had become something she never could have imagined, a bridge connecting grieving hearts across the country, and a reminder that love truly never dies. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through Catherine's frost-covered windows. She woke to the sound of her phone ringing continuously and realized with a start that she was supposed to do the Good Morning America interview in less than 2 hours. Sarah arrived at her apartment with a cup of coffee and a camera crew from the local television affiliate that would connect Catherine to the national broadcast. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, studying Catherine's face with concern. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "Yesterday I was just someone who worked at a nonprofit and wrote letters to her dead brother. Today I'm supposed to talk to millions of people on national television." "You don't have to say anything you don't want to say," Sarah reminded her. "Just speak from the heart, the way you did when you wrote the letter." The interview was surprisingly comfortable, despite Catherine's initial nerves. The host, Maria Santos, had clearly read the letter carefully and asked thoughtful questions about Catherine's relationship with Michael and what she hoped her message would accomplish. "Your letter has been shared thousands of times on social media since yesterday," Maria said. What do you think has struck such a chord with people? I think we all carry grief and love at the same time, Catherine replied. Especially during the holidays, when we're supposed to be happy but we're missing people who can't be with us anymore. Maybe my letter gave people permission to feel both sadness and joy together, instead of thinking they have to choose one or the other. What would your brother Michael think about all this attention his memory is receiving? Catherine smiled, and, for the first time since the interview began, she felt completely at ease. He would probably be making jokes about me becoming famous for writing him a letter. But I think he would be proud that his story is helping other people feel less alone in their grief. After the interview, Catherine's phone exploded with calls and messages. Her letter was being reprinted in newspapers across the country, and radio stations from coast to coast wanted to interview her. A publisher in New York called about the possibility of turning her letter into a book about grief and healing. But the responses that meant the most to Catherine were the personal messages from ordinary people who had been touched by her words. Her email inbox filled with stories from people sharing their own experiences with loss and how her letter had helped them. A teacher in Oregon wrote, "I lost my classroommate in a car accident 3 months ago. She was like a mother to me, and I've been struggling to find joy in teaching again. Your letter reminded me that she would want me to keep loving the work we did together, and that loving it doesn't mean I miss her any less." A soldier stationed overseas sent a message, "I lost my best friend in combat last year, and I've been carrying so much guilt about surviving when he didn't." Your words about love changing form but never ending helped me understand that honoring his memory means living fully, not just surviving. Catherine spent Christmas Day with her family, trying to process everything that had happened while also attempting to enjoy the holiday. The morning brought the usual traditions, opening presents, making breakfast together, and sharing stories about past Christmases. But this year was different because Michael's memory felt more present than absent. "It's like he's here with us," Catherine's mother said as they sat around the tree. "Not physically, but in all the love his story is spreading around the world." Catherine's father had printed out dozens of the emails and letters that had been sent to the newspaper office. He read several of them aloud, his voice breaking with emotion as he shared stories of people who had been helped by Catherine's words. "Listen to this one," he said, holding up a handwritten letter from an elderly woman in Florida. She says she lost her husband of 58 years last Christmas Eve, and she was planning to spend this Christmas alone and bitter. But your letter helped her realize that she could honor his memory by reaching out to other lonely people in her community. She's hosting Christmas dinner for 6 other widows from her church. By the afternoon, word had spread through their extended family and neighborhood that Catherine was the author of the letter that was becoming a national phenomenon. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate her and share their own stories of loss and healing. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman from down the street whom Michael used to help with her driveway, came by with tears in her eyes. "I had to come thank you," she said to Catherine. "When I read your letter in the paper yesterday, I finally understood why that boy of yours was so special. He saw people who needed help and he just helped them, without making a big fuss about it. Your letter is doing the same thing, helping people without asking for anything in return." That evening, Catherine received a phone call that would change the direction of her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. It was from Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the director of a national foundation that supported grief counseling programs. "Catherine, I've been following your story since yesterday," Dr. Harper said. "Your letter has touched something in the national consciousness that I've rarely seen. We'd like to talk to you about the possibility of creating a program based on your message, something that could help people across the country process grief during difficult times." "What kind of program?" Catherine asked. "We're thinking about workshops, support groups, maybe even a traveling exhibition about love and loss. Your letter has shown us that there's a deep hunger for honest conversations about grief, and we'd like to explore ways to meet that need." Catherine felt overwhelmed but also excited. The possibility of turning her personal experience into something that could systematically help others felt like a natural extension of what her letter was already accomplishing. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. But, Catherine, I want you to know that what you've started here is remarkable. In just 2 days, your words have given thousands of people a new way to think about love and loss." After hanging up, Catherine walked to her window and looked out at the city below. Christmas lights twinkled in windows, and she could see families gathered in their homes, celebrating together. Some of those families were probably missing loved ones, just as her family was missing Michael. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. It was a photo of a family gathered around a Christmas tree, holding copies of her letter. The message read, "Thank you for helping us remember that Grandma is still with us and all the love she taught us to share." Catherine realized that her letter had become something much larger than she ever could have imagined. It had become a bridge connecting grieving hearts across the country, a reminder that love transcends death, and a catalyst for conversations about loss that people had been afraid to have. She thought about Michael and how he had always believed that small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways we never anticipate. Her letter to him had become exactly that kind of ripple, spreading from her kitchen table to newspapers across the nation and into the hearts of people she would never meet. Over the following days, Catherine continued to receive calls from media outlets, grief counselors, and ordinary people who wanted to share their stories. She began to understand that her role was evolving from someone who had written a letter to someone who could help facilitate important conversations about love, loss, and healing. A week after Christmas, Catherine made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She accepted Dr. Harper's invitation to work with the foundation on developing grief support programs. She would take a leave of absence from the nonprofit to travel around the country, sharing her story and helping communities create spaces for people to process loss together. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked when Catherine told her about the decision. "I keep thinking about something Michael used to say," Catherine replied. "He said that when life gives you an opportunity to help people, you have a responsibility to take it. This feels like the most important work I could do right now." The first workshop took place in a community center in Baltimore, where Catherine spoke to a room of 50 people who had lost loved ones during the previous year. She read her letter aloud and then invited others to share their own experiences with grief and continuing love. A young father spoke about losing his wife in childbirth and struggling to raise their daughter while honoring his wife's memory. An elderly man talked about losing his adult son to addiction and learning to forgive himself for not being able to save him. A teenager shared her experience of losing her best friend in a car accident and feeling guilty for continuing to live her life. Each story was different, but they were all connected by the universal experience of loving someone beyond death. Catherine facilitated conversations that helped people realize they weren't alone in their struggle to balance grief and joy, to honor the past while building a future. "What I've learned," Catherine told the group, "is that grief isn't something we get over. It's something we grow around. The love that causes grief is also the love that can heal us, if we let it connect us to each other instead of isolating us." By the end of the workshop, the room felt transformed. People who had arrived as strangers were exchanging contact information and making plans to meet for coffee. They had found what Catherine's letter had first offered, a community of people who understood that love and loss could coexist, and that sharing our stories could lighten the burden of grief. As Catherine drove home from Baltimore, she felt Michael's presence in a way she hadn't experienced since his death. Not as an absence or a source of pain, but as a continuing force of love that was now reaching further than he ever could have in life. Her letter to him had become a gift to the world, and his memory had become a source of healing for countless people who needed to know that love truly never dies. Catherine understood now that grief had not been the end of their relationship, it had been the beginning of a new chapter, one where Michael's influence could touch lives in ways neither of them had ever imagined possible. The Christmas letter that began as a personal conversation between siblings had become a national movement reminding people that love is stronger than death, and that sharing our stories of loss can become our greatest gift to others who are learning to carry love forward in new ways.